Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Thank you. Morning. As some of you know, I recently visited Cambodia with my partner, where I lived for 4 years in my early 20s. I was really excited to visit again and catch up with some of my friends, but I was also nervous because one of the friends I planned to see, the husband in a couple that I'm friends with, is someone that I had some strong theological and political disagreements with over social media last year. But the family is one that I lived with for a time, and we share many precious memories over the years. So while the rift was a hard thing for me to grieve, I also really hoped for reconciliation. Perhaps it was an aversion to conflict or a genuine reaction to spiritual trauma that I've experienced in the past, but I was a ball of anxiety going into this reunion, unsure how it would play out. It turns out I didn't need to worry one bit. We played pickleball with the family, broke bread together, literally, their son made fresh sourdough, and asked genuinely caring questions about each other's lives. We left disagreements at the door and focused on our shared history and all we had in common. I was extremely grateful. It reminded me of Theo's talk about community a few weeks back. As he illustrated, not all stories of conflict end with this kind of repair. Romans 12:18 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And I think that that's all we're asked to do. Communion is a ritual that reminds us to live peaceably with others as much as is in our power. To take the bread broken by Christ and given to us, and to turn to the person next to us and offer it to them too. And that's the thought that I want to leave you with today.
Well, here we go. This morning we're talking about prayer. And in this series, which we called the Life of Liturgy, when the teaching team got together a few months ago now to plan this series, the heart behind it was really to take some time to explore some of those common things that we do together that as time goes by and we get familiar and sometimes perhaps over-familiar, we can almost forget some of the meaning or the intention that was behind those things that we do together. So we've looked at giving, we've looked at worship, we've looked at communion, community, baptism. Last week, Kathleen shared about the Word, the Bible, and how that gets used. And this morning we're looking at prayer, and the heart is that we would think not just about the form or how we do these things, but perhaps the heart behind them and really how it is that they are shaping who it is that we're becoming. Because we gather here on a Sunday and we meet together and there's lots of things that we do together, but how that impacts our Monday to Saturday, our relationships and our work and our families and all the people we meet along the way is really, for us, a bit of the testament of actually how beneficial our time together on Sunday actually is. While it's important that we enjoy this moment and we get something from it, we don't want it to start and finish in this particular moment of our week. We want it to be something that seeds that planted in you that actually shape you and that you are becoming more like Jesus as you go about your life. You know, when I said prayer at the beginning, some of you would have possibly had a visceral response to that. I think if I asked each one of you to get up here and share your experiences with prayer, there'd be a wonderful variety of responses, and I think they'd all be very honest and true, and I'd actually would love to hear that. It'd be quite fascinating. And so I wonder where you go when you think of prayer. Is it something that comes easy for you? Do you think to yourself, what on earth even is prayer? Is it something that makes you feel bad about yourself? Do you feel ashamed or kind of guilty that you're not quite as good as you think you should be? My guess is there'd be so many varied responses. And even today as I pulled together what on earth I would talk about, prayer is such a big topic that I have to just start by being very clear about the fact that, you know, what we can actually get to in 20 minutes is really barely a scratch of the surface. And so this morning as I prayed and asked God and kind of wrestled with what it is that I should share, I've decided to not do too much of a deep theological dive today, but perhaps just to share some reflections and thoughts from my own life and how prayer has shaped and moulded me. And so that's what I'm going to do this morning. So I hope that's okay. I hope that some of you can get something from that. Because my real hope today is that we would be able to reshape prayer from being a formula that we need to master or some skill that we need to acquire, to being more about a posture of our heart in response to God. And that we might be able to simplify some of the baggage that we might be carrying along with us as we think about prayer. You know, my earliest memories of praying I became a Christian when I was around 14, 15, and somehow, I don't quite know how, but I started a little bit of a bit of a ritual in my day. I'd hop into bed at night and I'd find myself in bed and I would just start to kind of thank God for things. And, you know, sometimes it was as simple as thank you, God, for who you are, and other times it might be a long list. And, you know, I looked back and I thought, I wonder why that was something that came so naturally. But I am someone who has quite a rich thought life, and that's my way of being really kind, of saying I'm really an overthinker and think way too much. I have a rich thought life. And so it wasn't too much of a stretch for me to kind of have thoughts in my head that I kind of turned towards God, if that makes sense. And for me, it was almost that kind of simple. You know, they were already there. The thoughts were buzzing at the end of a day anyway, and kind of somehow reframing them towards God felt like a bit of a natural response. And, you know, the Bible talks a lot about prayer. There's lots of descriptions about people praying or seeking God or crying out to God, and there's a myriad of verses you could search. And one day that might be actually something you should think about doing, is doing a bit of a topical search on prayer and seeing from the beginning of Genesis all the way through to Revelation what the Bible says about prayer. But I want to just share with you some of what Jesus says about prayer out of the Sermon on the Mount. You know, each year in kind of March we tend to do a longer deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount. And this particular passage in Matthew where Jesus heads towards the Lord's Prayer is bookended either side with some scaffolding, I think, which just makes all the difference. And I'm going to read it to you out of the Message because I love the way Eugene Peterson puts this to us in ways that we possibly can't quite escape. And it's titled in the Message with Pray with Simplicity. And when you come before God, don't turn that into a theatrical production either. All these people making regular show out of their prayers, hoping for 15 minutes of fame. Do you think that God sits in the box seat? Here's what I want you to do. Find a quiet place, a quiet, secluded place, so you won't be tempted to role play before God. And just be there as simply and honestly as you can manage. The focus will shift from you to God, and you'll begin to sense His grace. The world is full of so-called prayer warriors who are actually prayer ignorant. They're full of formulas and programs and advice, peddling techniques for getting what you want from God. Don't fall for that nonsense. This is your Father you are dealing with, and He knows better than you what you need. With a God like this loving you, you can pray very simply, just like this. Our Father in heaven, reveal who you are. Set the world right. Do what's best, as above, so below. Keep us alive with 3 square meals. Keep us forgiven with you and forgiving others. Keep us safe from ourselves and from the devil. You're in charge. You can do anything you want. You're ablaze in beauty. Yes, yes, yes. In prayer, there's a connection between what God does and what you do. You can't get forgiveness from God, for instance, without also forgiving others. If you refuse to do your part, you cut yourself off from God's part. And I love the way the Lord's Prayer there is bookended by these reminders, both to not make prayer something to please others, and that it's deeply relational, both with God and with the people around you. And if there's not many things you take away from today, that's one thing I'd love you to take away, is just that prayer is relational. It's not a science formula that if you put the right ingredients in, you'll end up with a certain result. It's incredibly relational. And so just like if I sat and had a conversation with each person in this room, I'd probably have different conversations, even if we had the same topic, because I'm unique and individual, you're unique and individual. The moment each one of us interacts with God, the possibilities of how that's going to take place and the conversations that will exist and the interactions that will ensue is just quite hard to comprehend. So I'd love you to feel the freedom when you think about prayer, to let go of any hang-ups you might have that make you think you don't quite get it right, that you don't do the right things, and just relax back into that very feeling you had or will have perhaps when you meet God and the person of Jesus in who they are. There's a relational element to prayer where our hearts are postured towards God. There's a turning and a yes to God that is almost hard to comprehend. It's hard to put words to. It might look the same on the outside. Only you will actually know whether that's a posture turn. And perhaps the fruit of your life will also show. But the question to ask ourselves is my heart open and moving towards God in prayer? Or is it closed and demanding? And whether it's small and closing or open and expanding is a really small indicator of where you're at and how you're feeling. You know, Robert Mulholland in his book called Invitation to a Journey says this: we tend to think of prayer as something we do in order to produce the results we believe are needed, or rather, to get God to produce the results. We're interested in knowing what works and developing the skills that will ensure our prayers are effective. As a result, our prayers can tend to be a shopping list of things to be accomplished, an attempt to manipulate the symptoms of our lives without entering into a deep, vital, and transforming relationship with God. Our shopping list, our symptom manipulation prayers, may actually be an attempt to keep God at arm's length and maintain control of our relationship with God on our terms. Prayer, as a classical spiritual discipline, draws us into God's involvement in the brokenness of the world on God's terms, not ours. And there's a lot there to unpack, but I love the way he puts prayer into this very relational and honest and raw space. Prayer requires us to be able to be honest with ourselves, because sometimes we might feel neat and tidy and done up, and then other times we're well and truly undone and in no state we feel to be coming before God. And yet there's no prerequisite for prayer in terms of how you're feeling. The prerequisite is that you're able to come as you are, that you can be vulnerable enough to trust where you're at with God. It's not an escape from reality. It's not about saying life's really hard right now, so I'm going to park all of that and kind of try and enter this spiritual plane. But it's a posture of our heart that connects our current reality to the reality of who God is. It's almost like an alignment between our soul and God, seeking that union with God even if we can't feel it right now. It's an invitation to be honest before God. And not because God doesn't know where you're at or how you're feeling or where you're up to, but so often it's because we're really busy fooling ourselves and perhaps fooling others that we're somewhere that we would like to be rather than actually being okay with where we're at. Again, it's this idea that we can somehow control our lives and then we can get it right, and then when I'm in the right spot, then I can come before God. And meanwhile, life just passes us by. Days turn into weeks, turn into years, and our heart gets hard and closed. You know, the original prayer book of the church was the Psalms. And, if you've read the Psalms in any short or long way, you'll be both challenged and probably refreshed by the absolute honesty found in page after page of the Psalms. It's not an easy read sometimes, to be perfectly honest, but there's an honesty and a rawness about it that you almost want to shy away from, but are kind of drawn to in the same breath. And they give us permission to come to God with big emotions, deep emotions that aren't sorted and wrapped up and neat and tidy. And it's fascinating when you read psalm after psalm where there's this initial start where there's almost an accusation against God and who he is and all that is lacking. And there's this beautiful turn that happens at some point where the hope and the trust and the love that's found in God seems to just supersede all of that and doesn't take it away. But it's this beautiful turning to God that, again, can be quite challenging. But I love the permission the Psalms give me to come to God with how I'm feeling, as I am. I don't have to tidy it up before coming to God, but that actually prayer can begin from the very place that I find myself in. And I say again, just to make sure we really get it in, it's not a formula. It's not a skill we can master. It's a constant evolving posture of our heart towards God. Henry Nouwen says, "We want to move closer to God, the source and goal of our existence. But at the same time, we realise that the closer we come to God, the stronger will be his demand to let go of the many safe structures we've built around ourselves." Honest prayer can leave us feeling exposed and vulnerable. There's no denying that. It's not for the faint-hearted. But the gift of God and God's presence and the fullness of his love that you find there is also like nothing else you can find. In Celtic Christianity, there's this idea of thin spaces. I don't know if you've heard of them before. And the idea here is that, a thin space is where the veil between this world and the spiritual realm feels exceptionally close, that it's incredibly thin, that you're standing almost on the threshold between two realities. And sometimes I think prayer is as simple as sensing where those thin spaces are and choosing to lean into them and being okay and surprised by where that might actually come. I think we find it easy to imagine a thin space might come up on a mountaintop where the vistas are, kind of standing in front of us, and that very much is the case. But sometimes the thin spaces can come in very ordinary, kind of, plain moments in our day. And let me be clear too, not all prayer requires words. That's the easier thing to see, and again, as someone who loves words, I do find words to me are one of the thin places where I find God, and that's always been the case. It's no surprise to me that I found Jesus reading the Bible, and even still, when I read words, there's a resonance that jumps out that I find God easier to recognise. And then as I've gone along, I now can recognise where God is elsewhere, but those prompts of words for me are really important. But some people find that nature is that space where those thin spaces exist. And if that's you, then make sure you go out into nature. Take that time. And I love the thought that as you lean into those spaces, that the words will come. The praise, the thanks, the heart cry, the desperation will come. But so often we think we have to start there and then wait for God to come. But you are uniquely created by God. There's ways that God speaks to you and that you feel God that are uniquely yours. And what a gift for us if you can go and find those spaces, and we get to benefit from that when we are in contact with you. For some people who are really creative, it's in their act of creating that they find the thin space between God, whether it's, music or pottery or poetry or painting. You know what it is for you. And again, bless us by moving into those spaces, experiencing the thinness of where God might be at work and allowing the prayers to just kind of bubble up from within inside you. There's a few prayers in particular that I find great encouragement in prayers that others have written. I didn't used to. I think, when I first came to church, and it was, in kind of a charismatic space where any prayer that was pre-written almost felt like there was no life to it because it was pre-written. It had to be kind of, prayers that flowed up. And while I love doing that as well, there's times where I really love just to pray. And when I prayed this morning, for instance, that was just me, kind of out of where God was at. But then again, there's times where I read prayers that others have written and, they just cut to my heart. And they put words into how I'm feeling that I'm not sure I would have found on my own. And I've learnt not to be bothered by that. And to actually, there's a few authors that I now know. There's obviously a way that they see God that connects with how I see God. And, and then there's an Anglican prayer that I found years ago called the Compline Prayer. And this was at a season of life where, I've always been a light sleeper. So, I would say my relationship with sleep is, kind of tenuous at best. It's getting better, but as I've gotten older. But for those of you who sleep light and are awake at night and you have, times in the nighttime where you're just kind of awake, I thought to myself, how do I use this time better? Because I'd find my brain I get stuck in my thoughts, right? So all of a sudden I wake up and my brain's like, great, let's problem solve everything. And it's 1,000 miles an hour. And I was just like, this is just ridiculous. And then I found a book by Trish Harrison Warren, which is called Prayers of the Night. And I was like, that sounds like something I need. So I thought I'll have a read of that. And in this book, she unpacks this Compline prayer. which I'll read to you in a minute. And she really packs it down, unpacks it word by word. And, and I found learning this prayer just really beautiful for me, especially over night time. And it says, keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend to the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous, and all for your love's sake. Amen. And there's times at night where I just get to the end of my day and, just wanting to recenter my thoughts. And as I pray that, I often might think of people. If I've just come from the shops, I might think of the security guard that I just walked past coming out of the shops, or, or the ambulance that passes on the street, or, and this thought that even though I'm heading to sleep, that God is at work in the world, that God cares for us in the myriad of our experiences. And I've just found that incredibly helpful for me. I'm embarrassed to say just how long it took me to learn it word for word. Sometimes it can be really hard memorising things. Does anybody else have that trouble? Really hard. So honestly, it's taken me years to learn how to memorise that, so that now I can hop into bed and I've kind of got some word iterations in my head and I can just repeat it over and over and go slowly and kind of chew on that like it's a bit of a final meal for the day. But like I say, for you, if it's nature, if it's creating, whatever it is for you, my encouragement to you is to go and find those spaces. Because prayer is a heart response to the part of us that just longs for our current reality to be infused with the fullness of God's love. And that can happen in the good times, that can happen in the bad times, that can happen in the ugly times. The nature of that doesn't matter. But to learn how to posture your heart, even in the worst of times, to God. I wonder if it is a bit like, an athlete who spends their time practicing, training over and over and over, so that in the moment of the game, they actually have some muscle memory, some mental agility to be able to flex and know what's required in the moment. And I wonder if prayer is a bit like that for us as well. That if we can lean into God with an open posture in just the ordinary everyday moments of our life, that perhaps in those troublesome, broken, wounded moments that we experience, we're not grappling at that moment to find where God is. We're actually going back to a posture that we recognise, that we can settle into, that we can find great comfort in. So prayer is incredibly relational, but it's also right where you are. There's an honesty about it. It can be as messy or as neat as you like. Brother Lawrence says this in The Practice of the Presence of God. By practicing God's presence and continuously looking at him, the soul familiarises itself with him to the extent that it passes almost its whole life in continual acts of love, praise, confidence, thanksgiving, offering and petition. Sometimes all this may merge into one single act that does not end, because the soul is always in this ceaseless exercise of God's divine presence. I mean, that sounds like some life goals to me. This idea that prayer would actually no longer even be a thing or an event or a moment, but actually becomes a way of being in this world that doesn't separate us from our experience, but that allows us to walk through life in a way that we're aware of God and God's presence. So let me also give you permission to just remove condemnation and guilt from prayer. Because the goal is not that we don't ever turn away from God or don't miss the mark, but that every time we recognise that we have, that we would again open our hearts, that we would posture towards God. Let's not get stuck up on the time after time after time after time that we find ourselves in no man's land, but let's brush that off and again reposition and reposture ourselves. There was a little story I read in preparation for this, and it was around what's called the centering prayer. It's again a particular kind of a space of prayer, and this nun, upon trying this particular practice of a centering prayer, which I won't go into here, came back really despondent because in this 20-minute period that she'd tried this centering prayer, she's like, just 10,000 times her mind just wandered and I just couldn't get it. And this other nun, I think it was, that was teaching her, just said, well, how wonderful, 10,000 opportunities to turn back to God. And I just thought, what a beautiful way of rephrasing that. and going like, how amazing, 10,000 opportunities to turn to God. And that was really a beautiful thought to me. And because recently I have really loved what's been called the welcoming prayer, and I only came across it probably about, maybe even a few months ago. And it's this idea that, again, as someone who gets stuck in my head and, who can find myself just going around on the spot, and it can take me a while to notice that that's what I'm doing. I think I'm being really clever, and actually I'm just stuck on some thought or stuck in a feeling. There's sometimes a visual feeling, whether it be nerves or fear or anxiety or vulnerability or whatever it might be. And the idea of the welcoming prayer is that you actually take a moment to just recognise how you are in your body, and that rather than ignore that or just kind of move past it quickly, that you actually welcome it as an opportunity to a deeper work of God. And that's been quite fascinating for me, as I found myself time and time again just being able to say, even this morning as I was preparing to do this and the nerves and the anxiety, and I'm like, oh gosh, why do I do this? Every time I think that to myself. If only you knew how close I was to walking out the door every time, you might think differently of me. But in that moment, I was like, oh, hello exposure, my old friend, was what I said to myself. I welcome you as an opportunity for the deeper work of God. And I can't tell you now how many times I say that phrase over in my day. And it might be, hello, smallness, my old friend. Hello, fear, my old friend. Whatever it has been, that's just been my way of being a bit playful with it too, and going, it's old friend. I know you well. But just the idea that God might want to be at work in that space in me. There's a realigning that takes place. Now, some people might just say, sure, that's just a bit of positive thinking. You can label it whatever you want to label it. I don't mind. I know for me that what that's done is it's just allowed me to not run from the things that I think I need to run from, but to acknowledge them and recognise that God's right there with me, and that there's a work God's doing in me that I get to partner with, and that's been incredibly powerful. And so what I want to finish today with is actually want to play us a song, because I know for some people music is incredibly powerful, and it is for me, and lyrics in particular really kind of stir me. And there's this song by the Porter's Gate called The Centering Prayer, and it focuses on some of the elements of the centering prayer. And I thought, you know what, I actually just want to play it for us to create a space where we can stop, we can be slow. You can do with this space as you choose. You can shut your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. You can sit and listen. I don't mind what you do, but I'm going to get Calvin to play this as a way of wrapping up this message this morning, and then I'm going to invite us to the table. So why don't you get yourself comfortable, and then we will have a listen together. Thanks, Calvin.
Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at Westcity, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.